Um, Good evening and welcome. Just as another reminder before we get started, I'll probably say it twice now, is that we're using Zoom webinar this evening. And so don't be alarmed if you can't turn on your microphone or your camera. That is part of the Zoom webinar feature. There is live transcript for you at the bottom of your right-hand screen. If you press the More button with the three dots, you'll see the live transcript come up there as well. Just be aware that we are recording this section of the crash course presentation this evening. The Q&A section at the end will not be recorded. And I'll get into some more details about that. But before we go any further, I'd like to start this evening with a treaty acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that I'll start this again. We would like to acknowledge Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10 territories in Alberta. Tonight, we acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations, including the many places that you are joining from. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. We recognize the land as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting. So welcome to Crash Course on the Draft K-6 Curriculum Part 2 discussion. I'm your moderator, Jason Schilling, and I'm president of the Alberta Teachers Association. Prior to my election as president, I taught high school English and drama at Kate Andrews High School in Coaldale, just east of Lethbridge. Tonight, we will hear from members of the Department of Elementary Education who will comment on the draft K-6 curriculum, highlighting areas of strength and areas of concern. I'm going to introduce our panelists just right away here, but we will hear more about them and I'll introduce them in greater detail a little bit later as they present. So our panelists joining us tonight from the Department of Elementary Education are Dr. Doug Geldy. See, Doug, I told you I would screw the name up, and I did. My apologies.
Close enough, Jason. Close enough.
Like I said, if you know me, you know that's going to happen. And we're recording this for prosperity as well. So there you go. Dr. Haley Morrison, Dr. Linda Laidlaw, Dr. Susanna Wong, Dr. Jareen Peg, Dr. Mijan Kim. Thank you and good evening to all of you. And I apologize again if I got your names wrong. So thank you for attending and participating in tonight's panel discussion. We know that the curriculum is a topic that many people care about, and quite honestly, rightfully so. No doubt you've heard a lot in the media about it from teachers, parents, school boards, academics like tonight, and members of Indigenous, Francophone, and 2S LGBTQ+ communities, as well as others. There's a lot of concern about the process, the content, and now the implementation, as we've recently learned more about the government's intention to proceed with the K-3 English Language Arts Literacy, Math, K-6 Phys Ed, and Wellness curriculums this fall. Tonight's session is for members of the general public who have concerns about the current direction of curriculum development in Alberta, who would like to have more information in order to provide feedback on the drafts to their MLAs, to the Minister of Education, or who just want to be able to share information about the draft curriculum with family and friends. Following the panelist presentations, there will be an opportunity for audience members to ask questions. I'll ask that you use the Q&A function that is in the Zoom webinar. It's at the bottom of your screen. As a participant, you will not have access to your microphone or your video camera. We will take one question at a time, and we ask that you use your name in the Q&A as well. You can also like another question. Maybe it's the same question that you have by clicking the thumbs up, and that moves that question up the queue. Also, you can click on the bottom of your screen to the live transcript button to see a live transcript. There will also be some links shared with you periodically throughout the evening. Also, please note that the webinar is being recorded. The panelists' comments only, not the question and answer section. The link to the recording will be made available after the webinar. You can find the recording from part 1 featuring Dr. Lynn McGarvey, who talked about math, Dr. Carla Peck, who talked about social studies, and Dr. Kathy Robinson, who talked about music at www.alberta-curriculum-analysis.ca in the general section. But before we get started, we're going to actually launch a poll to get a sense of who's with us in the audience tonight. And just be aware, if we set this up right, I don't know, Zoom polls, you should be able to choose more than one option. So there you go. The poll is open for us to get a sense of who do we have in the audience this evening. And we'll leave this up for a couple of seconds. We should have had maybe some bets as panelists to see who had the closest number of who would be the largest percentage of our audience tonight. Last time we did this, people too were wondering how many participants we have. We have about 220 with us today. And this poll by means is not scientific because you can choose more than one answer. So some people were like, the math doesn't work, Jason. What are you talking about? You can choose more than one response. So it's by no means that. So just a sense of who our audience is. I'll give you just a couple more seconds with the poll. Perfect. I think that we have probably as many as we're going to get. So I close the poll. Responses, we have parents with us tonight, grandparents, teachers, school administrators, other school staff, university students, concerned Albertans, some elected officials with us this evening. So thank you for making time and for spending some of your busy lives with us this evening to learn more about this curriculum, something that we care about. So let's begin. And we're not here to listen to me talk all evening. So we're going to start with the different subject areas, and we're going to start off with the physical education and wellness curriculum area. Each presentation is going to be about 15 minutes or so in length, and then we'll take questions at the end of all three presentations. So please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. If you like it, that bumps that question up, and we've got a chance to look at those later on. So we're going to start with presentations from Dr. Doug Geldy, who's a husband and father who also happens to be professor of physical education at the University of Alberta. He's a founding member of the Healthy Schools Lab and researches stories of physical education, school sport, physical literacy, meaningful physical education, and teacher education. We're also going to hear from Dr. Haley Morrison, who is an associate professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Alberta and is the subject area coordinator in elementary education for physical and health education. Haley researches inclusive physical health education, and her teaching and research are very interconnected as she aims to support inclusive experience for all individuals. So welcome, and the metaphoric Zoom floor.
Thanks very much, Jason. Much appreciated. And we're very happy to be here on behalf of the Healthy Schools Lab. Haley's going to start sharing our presentation. So the K-6 physical education and wellness curriculum. We want to start off with just a little bit on why do we even care, and maybe why should you even care? So first of all, we know that the content in our physical and health education programs can be critical to helping students, parents, Albertans, etc., be healthy. Just as an example, in Canada, an estimated 14 to 25% of children and youth suffer from significant mental health issues. Health education is currently the only subject that includes outcomes targeted at positive mental health, teaching students about stigma, strategies to support positive mental health, and resources and supports to cope with these issues. Physical education is the only subject that provides students with opportunities to be physically active and to develop knowledge, skills, and attitudes for life, which is a critical component of holistic health now, but also for the future. Number two, education cannot be considered a whole child unless it includes education of the physical. And physical education is important because movement is joyful, pleasurable, provides intrinsic satisfaction, and can be personally meaningful and central to the human experience, and that comes from Blankenship and Ayers. Furthermore, the joy and meaningfulness that can be found through physical and health education are inherently valuable in and of themselves. Often when people ask us, why phys ed and health? We say because phys ed and health. So when the driving force is facilitating meaningfulness and joy, guess what? Health, academic benefits come along for the ride. Furthermore, UNESCO recently put out a call for action globally for investment in quality physical education to support COVID-19 recovery, and calls for teachers and all actors in sport, education, health, and youth ecosystems to invest, implement, and advocate for quality physical and health education policy and programs. So the importance of quality PHE is recognized worldwide.
And this slide is just to give you a short overview of where we've been, which highlights the current curriculum outcomes. Physical education has centered on supporting students with their knowledge, skills, and attitudes to lead healthy, active lifestyles. And this is done through activity, benefits health, cooperation, and doing it daily for life outcomes that support students. And one clear message here from the physical education curriculum is that all of the learning takes place through movement. So these outcomes are being taught by engaging with physical activity. And the health and life skills curriculum is aimed at enabling students to make well-informed, healthy choices and to develop behaviors that contribute to the well-being of self and other. And this is done through content and experiences of wellness, relationships, and life learning choices. Now here shows you where we're going, what the physical education and wellness organizing ideas are. And we do see alignment in some of these organizing ideas from our current curriculum, specifically active living, the movement skill development, safety, relationship choices, and growth and development. But we're moving two curriculum to one. So there's also no clear indication of how students will be learning through movement. As you can see, only 2 of these 8 organizing ideas are focused and movement-based, whereas we had an entire curriculum centered on physical activity. So what is the plan for implementation? How is this going to look in schools? Our bodies are designed to move, and by reducing the physical education components here, it means that bums are going to be numb, that there's going to be an increase of student behaviors in school. And we also see here an element of financial literacy, but I don't want to spoil some of the concerns in the rest of the presentation, so I will pass it back over to Doug.
Okay, seriously, we're going with an acronym of PEW, because that already has enough stigma attached to it and the stereotypes have gone on long enough. Health and physical education take place in many environments, not just the gym or a classroom, but the new curriculum could be setting us up for failure here. As others have said before, and most likely will continue to say after, we also struggle with a format that is unorganized and unclear, a poorly designed and deliberately shallow consultation process, and no clear summary of changes based on feedback to this point. That being said, we're going to start with 3 broad concerns. First off, the draft K-6 curriculum does not align with current educational research in the field of physical and health education. The current curricula are quite strong, internationally recognized, and are still relevant, innovative, and evidence-informed. That doesn't mean they have room for improvement, but here are a sample of areas we feel missed the mark. Number 1, and probably the most key, is the absence of physical and health literacy. Although literacy is listed as one of the 4 key learning themes that span all grades within the K-6 curriculum, to our surprise and dissent, physical and health literacy were not mentioned within the draft. Physical and health literacy at the forefront of present research and positively impact experiences and participation in health-related behaviors. Physical literacy focuses on the motivation, confidence, physical competence, knowledge, and understanding to value and take responsibility for engagement in physical activities for life. Health literacy refers to the degree to which an individual has the capacity to obtain, communicate, process, and understand basic health information to make health decisions, all skills which are essentials for healthy citizens now and in the future. Secondly, we're missing the comprehensive approach to health. While physical and health education curricula are foundational to well-being, all Alberta teachers need to be engaged in the promotion of student health. We know that health and education are inextricably linked, and comprehensive school health is an internationally recognized and extensively researched approach, which actually Canadians are leading the way in, to support students' well-being through whole school strategies. Within the program rationale and philosophy of our current K-9 health and life skills, comprehensive school health is noted as desirable because it is. Finally, where is the meaningfulness in physical and health education? We've gone beyond just looking at checking off boxes. There's been a lot of work recently looking at meaningfulness in physical education and health that is beginning to transfer to health education. Essentially, providing meaningful experience enables lifelong connections, using movement to enrich the quality of our lives. Students find meaning in social interactions, just right challenges, mastering a new skill, fun, personal relevance, and the experience of joy. A new draft curriculum should be grounded in evidence and move us forward from where we've been, not backwards.
Now, in relation to some specific concerns, we do have a lot and we don't have the time to cover those. So I encourage you to look at some of the analysis that has been done, and we will share a link here for more information. But we want children to learn to be active, and we want them to learn about their bodies. Unfortunately, the stages that children are learning things is not actually reflective of who they are and their own developmental levels. And on our next slide, we will give you some examples. The content and the language is not super inclusive. It's privileged and it doesn't represent Alberta's communities. Although I did notice in my most recent review of the document that there have been some modifications and changes, such as I'm now seeing more content on First Nations, Métis, and Inuit within the grade 3 and 4 curriculum outcomes. I personally worry about these ideas being presented that will lead us into a one Indigenous Games Day or a Paralympic Day. And yes, these might highlight those communities and different abilities, but we want to be teaching diversity throughout our curriculum, not as a one-off, one size kind of fits all notion here. So we want to give you a few examples of some of the language and some of the issues that we've come across. And so in the grade 4 curriculum, they have students creating fitness goals. And we ask, why are we having 9-year-olds create fitness goals? Fitness shouldn't be a main focus for children ages 8 to 12 years old. The research has pointed us away from fitness-focused physical education programs. It's not to say that we don't think fitness is important, but we think that children at this age should be focused on learning about the joy of movement, experiencing movement in a variety of contexts, and having a sense of value for physical activity. Another example in grade 4 is having students analyze food labels and food portion sizes. While in grade 6, we're seeing students having to make healthy food choices, understanding the costs of healthy foods and food access. But these outcomes are actually placing judgment on foods. It could lead to obsessing about food labels and showcasing economic inequity. And these misunderstandings for elementary education students are all surround something that they might not have control over. Are they really the ones who are packing their lunches? So we want to make sure that this curriculum has healthy body image content, health for all, and respect and appreciation for all that the body can do. Not teaching young children to overanalyze and place judgment on eating and promoting unhealthy relationships with their food and bodies.
Furthermore, to speak to the financial literacy piece, the organizing ideas, back to our second slide, say that informed financial decision-making contributes to the well-being of individuals, groups, and communities, which we would agree with. However, the outcomes we've seen thus far include more money math and banking, and thus far have not demonstrated the connections to well-being. Furthermore, back in 2011, 2012, I did some research with curricular revision, and I interviewed students at Grant MacEwan University who are 2 years removed from their 2 or 4 years removed from their high school career and life management course. And they were saying how disconnected it was learning about how to budget for living on their own in grade 10. This feels the same. This feels like we're putting these things because we feel they should be in rather than what actually works for that developmentally appropriate piece. So I'd like to move on finally to a few strengths in this program. There are some positive aspects to be found within this draft. And as Haley mentioned, there's been a few changes First of all, there is a focus on land-based activities, outdoors in various locations. That's a solid addition, and the research shows a clear need to connect to the land and for people to be outdoors, and it also connects to our Indigenous friends as well. Second, there is mention of appropriate risk-taking and risky play, and I will state not hazardous play, but risky, and we don't have time to get into the definitions, but it's increasingly shown to benefit children, their ability to risk assess for themselves. Perhaps the big barrier here will be insurance policies, but we'll see. Finally, we do recognize a focus on social emotional competencies and positive mental health. The inclusion of competencies such as self-regulation, managing emotions, building resiliency, and healthy relationships align with our current understanding of the skills students need. Awesome. However, there is little mention, so far one learning outcome in grade 1, of the interconnections between the dimensions of wellness. How does physical activity connect with mental health? How does your mental health connect with your perception of environmental health or financial literacy? Perhaps the recognition of the interconnections between mental health, physical activity, other dimensions across all grade levels will result in more learning outcomes focused on movement. So we will wrap it up, and we kept within our limit. Carla, we were very keen on that. If you'd love to touch base with us further, we can be found at the Healthy Schools Lab, and our emails and Twitter handles are there. Thank you very much on behalf of both Haley and I. High five, Haley.
It would have been nice if you'd timed out the screen like that. That would have been
So cool.
Depending on where you are on the Zoom screen, I guess. Thank you, Doug and Haley, for that. A lot of really great information in there. And some of the concerns actually that you brought up, I'd also seen in the association's critical analysis of the curriculum as well, especially about the connecting of the ideas and the lack of movement that you're seeing within the curriculum there. So thank you for that. Just a reminder, if you have questions as you're going along, please put them in the Q&A. You can use the like button, and that'll bump them up to the top of the list. And we will try to get to as many questions as we can when we get to the end of the presentations. So we're going to move on then into science. Or no, sorry, we are going to English language arts and literacy. I'm just making sure our panelists were keeping up with me there, or I was keeping up with them. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Linda Laidlaw, who's a former primary grade teacher and is a professor in the language and literacy education at the University of Alberta, where she teaches and researches in the area of early literacy education. Her latest research projects aim to develop new frames and strategies for literacy education in a changing world. Joining her is Dr. Susanna Wong, who is currently an adjunct professor and an associate lecturer of language and literacy in the elementary education department of the University of Alberta. She is a former primary grade teacher in Alberta for over 30 years. And I don't believe that for a second. So there we go. The Zoom floor is yours.
All right. There we go. Oh, I think you need
All
to
right.
pop it onto your.
So I
There we
will
go.
start playing.
There we are.
Okay.
So thank you very much for inviting us to speak about the Alberta English Language Arts and Literature draft curriculum. And we've both been on many curriculum development committees over the years, including those in other provinces. And one of us from as far back as the Lougheed government, and I'll let you guess which one, in our various roles as teachers, and then later as academic representatives. In this draft, it's very clear that it has not had adequate input from educators, and it does not seem to consider what young children can actually do, and what's really widely recognized by researchers. As we begin, we find the title of this curriculum a bit strange. Why is literature separated from the language arts? Literature is an integral part of English language arts, and we cannot find any other examples across Canada where it's been labeled this way or presented separately. It doesn't make any sense to us and to many of our colleagues in the field. Next slide. We find the structure of this curriculum document to be confusing as well. For example, in the category of learning outcomes, it's divided into knowledge, understanding, and skills and procedures, but these tend to be broken up into many different tasks that are disconnected. There are far too many items under knowledge and skills and procedures, and we see places where they're not supporting the outcomes. This is the opposite of what curriculum experts were recommending when the PC government first launched the revision process and long before the 2018 draft. It's important to recognize that learning's not simply intellectual for young children. They can't learn anything effectively unless they have time and support to try things out, look at things in different ways, share what they're doing with others, explore ideas, and spend time practicing literacy in context. That's how young children consolidate their learning. Not allowing time and space for this consolidation sets them up for longer-term problems because their learning will be shallow, far too shallow to provide a solid foundation for subsequent learning in language and literacy and elsewhere. For example, in the kindergarten section of the ELAL curriculum, there are 86 separate skills and procedures that are listed. And I want to get you to think about that because most kindergarten children are in half-day programs. And in fact, kindergarten is still optional in Alberta. So this raises some big flags for us, as it will be impossible for any teacher to fully implement. And this is just one subject area being addressed. They have others. One of our other concerns is that, unlike previous curricula, there's a complete disconnect from other subject areas as well, where knowledge is presented as facts, and there will no longer be opportunities for making connections across subject areas like literacy and social studies or science, and strengthening literacy across content areas. We do want to acknowledge, however, that we like some of the organizing ideas and guiding questions, but how these have been translated into outcomes needs a lot more work. Over to Suzanne.
In terms of statistic and batting averages, and why, of course, there always is room for improvement, Alberta students have typically done well in both PISA and PIRLS rankings. Now, PISA is the Program of International Students Assessment, which is a worldwide study by the Organization of Economics Cooperation and Development, which measure 15-year-olds' performance on reading, math, and science. PIRLS is a progress in international reading literacy study and is an international assessment that measured trends in reading achievement of grade 4 students every 5 years. I was involved in assessing the Canadian PIRLS test this last summer, and those results will come out very soon. Now, Alberta has a good track record and has been sought out by Finland and other top ranking countries because of our strong records in schools and curriculum. So there was no history of failure of our system. I always get stuck on this one. Our outdated curriculum does fit within the OEC standards very well, which are world standards. The UPC appointed Curriculum Advisory Committee identified literacy as an area of strength in the province based on PISA and PIRLS and Pan-Canadian testing. Everyone has previously agreed there was room for improvement, but the current draft had actually taken out the parts that were working and has not undertaken the improvement that were needed. Now, the draft curriculum is composed of isolated skills as its foundation. What do we mean by isolated skills? In the draft, children are not required to use the skills taught in meaningful, purposeful, and functional ways. In this draft, children need to learn the skills without engaging with literacy and in a superficial way. The draft relies heavily on what is known as science of reading theory, Signs of reading focus mostly on reading as word identification, as opposed to a deeper understanding of literacy as involving critical thinking around diverse texts that can take shape in different ways in different subjects. As English language arts experts with curriculum background, we would never support this. The current draft is overloaded with isolated phonological, phonics, spelling, and grammar skills, even though these are essential skills for literacy development. They need to be taught in a way that promotes understanding and that acknowledges the connections across language arts. In our example above here in this slide, kindergarten students are asked to separate compound words into individual words, something that teachers usually begin to teach in later primary grades. Once students have a better understanding of the structure of words and can read a bit.
Here's another example. Take a look at the skills and procedures section that's focused on subtracting syllables, sounds, and something we call onsets and rhymes. And know that children in kindergarten may not be confident with adding and subtracting on paper, let alone with language in their heads. For a moment, pretend you're a kindergarten student. Think of a word that has 3 syllables. I'll give you a second. Now, try to take out one of the syllables. Was it easy for you? And did your word make any sense? Children at this age are just starting to discover what a word is in spoken language and how language can be presented in books and other texts. The draft strongly emphasizes that reading largely involves decoding every word. However, children need to use a wide range of word identification strategies to figure out unfamiliar words in their reading and to gain competence as readers. Children first need to see words in actual context before they start to take them apart and analyze them. Next slide.
Yeah,
Oh, now we're on to that. There we go. Here are a couple more examples that stand out for us, though there are many to choose from. It's puzzling to us that kindergarten children are being asked to attend to punctuation when they're at the very beginning of their literacy journey. They're just starting to learn the alphabet, how to write some simple words. So why are they being asked to recognize elements such as periods, exclamation marks, question marks, and commas? We can't think of any good reason to move that from first grade into kindergarten, and certainly nothing in literacy research supports learning about punctuation before learning to read. We also see areas that have been arbitrarily shifted out of kindergarten and into grade 1. For example, it's inexplicable to us why this draft has environmental print in first grade. Environmental print involves such things as recognizing logos and familiar signs. Often this is something that many preschoolers are picking up. And I remember my own 2-year-old daughter screaming KFC every time we drove past one that she'd never visited. Decades of research address environmental print recognition as a priority in kindergarten and early literacy as part of children's introduction to the many ways literacy can be used, and to show how ideas can be represented through text examples that will be familiar to young children. One of the things that was working in the K-3 curriculum from 2000 was that it allowed teachers flexibility to adapt instruction for diverse learners and to build on what children know. For example, there was an emphasis on building on the literacy experiences children had at home and in their communities. The initial emphasis was on language that was relevant to children, or language the teacher knew the children were using on a daily basis, whether it be from their home, the community, a subject area, a much-loved story, or a favorite movie. By contrast, the new draft emphasis on arbitrary high-frequency word lists and vocabulary that children may use later is troubling.
we also want to acknowledge some of the other general gaps in the draft English language arts curriculum. One area that is deficit is a focus on oral spoken language development. It is the foundation of literacy learning and learning in many other areas. 4 to 5-year-old children are just becoming competent spoken language users and starting to understand ways of doing things in school. While speaking and listening are addressed, much of this seems to be about school procedures and behaviors. Although we were happy to see an area added to include oral traditions of First Nations, Métis, and Inuits, the focus for speaking and listening seems to be more about behavior compliances than opportunity for oral communication and learning how language works. We also find a lack of cultural awareness represented in these outcomes and can anticipate that children from diverse backgrounds may be marginalized. For example, if they do not make eye contact or use other cultural communication practices that are different from those listed. A strong curriculum, like we have seen elsewhere, anticipates that children come from diverse backgrounds and have different experiences with language and communication practices. This one does not. In the meantime, we have yet to see progress in the area where language art curriculum needed improvement, according to even the first curriculum review known as Inspiring Education. A 21st century curriculum needs to teach children how to think about all kinds of texts, including those they encounter every day from a variety of media and digital resources. Digital media literacy involves much more than simply reading and writing digital text using a computer. This too is largely absent in the draft curriculum. Critical literacy helps us to understand ourselves, others, and the world. It includes asking questions, thinking about what the authors have said, thinking about the text may hold biases and stereotypes, and how texts connect to the cultural and social beliefs. In today's world, we need to know more about the information we are encountering. How can children learn what is accurate information, what may not be? This too is lacking in the draft curriculum. The draft also lacks recognition that text can help us understand various communities, cultures, and diverse groups. And finally, as active language and literacy researchers, we find the narrow presentation of literacy theories in the draft is also problematic. The outcomes describe a particular way of teaching and assessing students' learning that reduces English language arts to a limited set of discrete skills as opposed to practicing literacy in purposeful and authentic ways.
We're going to end our presentation with some additional concerns we have about the English language arts and literature draft. If early literacy learners are not successful because they're being required to engage in tasks that are not developmentally appropriate, as well as too many of them, we'll see children who become disengaged and disinterested in school and learning right at the start. Children will lack confidence in their abilities because it's impossible, and parents will be deeply unhappy with their children's learning experiences when they're overwhelmed. We already know that many parents are especially concerned about September. We wonder too, who is going to provide and develop the recommended resources? Who's going to provide the professional development for teachers? And remember too, school is out for the summer, July 1st. So there are really only 3 more months before implementation. This curriculum is just not ready. It needs to go back to committees with active teacher participation, a broader range of university experts in literacy education, and input from parents and community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I appreciate your presentation and your insights on that. And I think you hit a really good point at the end there with the implementation, which is a lot of questions that teachers have and that we've been asking of government as well in terms of implementation, the resources around the text that will be needed. And I know that we didn't really get into the literature part of what you were talking about with the curriculum as well. So there's a huge conversation that needs to be had there, as well as professional development. And another thing that I find is absent from a lot of the conversations, and we'll get right into the science here part as well, is assessment as well as a big conversation to still need to be had at this point. So let's move on then so that we can move into our next presenters. So we're going to start talking about science, the K-6 science curriculum. So Dr. I'll make sure I get your name right, Doreen Pegg is a professor of science education and the chair of the Department of Elementary Education. Her research has examined aspects of scientific inquiry, integration of science and literacy, and teacher professional learning. She served on the Alberta Science Curriculum Working Group from 2016 to 2018. Dr. Mijong Kim is a professor of science education in the Department of Elementary Education. Her work focuses on children's scientific reasoning and problem solving and classroom discourse. She was involved in a curriculum analysis project in East Asian countries, China, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, Singapore, and Taiwan, which help her understand the diversity of curriculum design and development. And I look forward to your presentation this evening, and the Zoom room is all yours.
Thank you so much for your kind introduction. I will share my screen, so give me a minute to share my screen. Share. Okay, I hope it works. Let's do that. All right. Okay. Thank you so much for inviting us to this really important conversation. Before we start to look into the draft elementary science curriculum, we'd like to take a moment to discuss the overview of science education and why science is an important component of the elementary curriculum. Children are naturally curious about the world around them. They always bring a lot of questions and wonders into science classrooms. So quality science learning activities at the elementary level can foster children's curiosity and wonders, develop critical thinking and decision-making skills, and also help them become active problem solvers in personal and also social context. One of the pictures on this slide, especially the bottom right, it shows how children were engaged in the testing water quality in their own communities. So in this case, children are engaged in the social, scientific, and environmental problem solving through science learning. So for their problem solving, it is really critical to achieve science knowledge, skills and attitude, and also the understandings of science, technology, society, and the environment relationships. So in science education, we call these abilities as scientific literacy, and this is the ultimate goal of science education globally. If we take a look at the Canadian science education context, scientific literacy is, of course, emphasized as the goal of science education, including knowledge, skills, and attitudes to help students increase decision-making and problem-solving processes. Especially in this document, the nature of science is emphasized as another important component of scientific literacy. But the question is, what is the nature of science and why is it really important in science education? Sorry. So the nature of science is the question about what science really is and how scientific knowledge develops. There has been a lot of research done in terms of the nature of science, how science is different from other disciplines, and also how we teach science in authentic ways. So on the left, we show how people in science and science education communities explain the nature of science. They use a lot of different versions and different statements to explain the nature of science. However, they all agree with certain key ideas, which are shown on the right. So they agree that science gives priority to evidence. Science knowledge is subject to change, of course, based on new evidence. Science is the explanation of the natural world. Science is the combination of logic and imagination. So that includes curiosity and creativity, of course. And science is the social cultural activity. So because it is a social cultural and human activity, it is value laden, not value free. So based on the understandings of scientific literacy as goal of science education, and also the understandings of nature of science, science curriculum has been developed. So in any countries, when we take a look at the science curriculum, there are subdomains of sciences. So we see life science, physical science, earth and space science, and sometimes we see chemistry as separate domain of science. And in our case, in Alberta, computer science has become one of the new domain of science. So whatever domains there are in science curriculum, there's always clear outcomes for knowledge, skills, and processes and attitudes. It's moving too fast. And then the nature of science and STSE relationships and also scientific inquiry are the overarching emphasis and approaches in science curriculum. So based on those understandings, we can take a look at our current science curriculum in Alberta. The current science curriculum is written in 1996. This is really old. However, we can clearly see the components of scientific literacy there. There is a strong focus on scientific inquiry, technological problem solving, and also scientific attitudes. There are 5 science units in each grade, and it all includes the subdomains of sciences. And so far, Alberta scores in the International Test of Science are pretty high, higher than other provinces, and also it is higher than some of the highest in the world. So even if it's old, we've been doing well in terms of the international test. But we all know the international test scores are not all about science learning and science teaching. And also we know that the society is changing, the science is also changing. So it's about it's time to bring those changes in our science curriculum. So then what's new in our new curriculum 2020 draft? So now we clearly see that the kindergarten science, specific science outcomes in the document, some of the science content and concepts are updated based on the advances in science over time. The example could be the Pluto was a planet, but it is now classified as dwarf planet. So that could be one example of the updated science content. And we also see the indigenous perspectives, indigenous knowledge is included. And again, the computer science strand as added as another science domain. There are some other changes and also concerns through the lens of scientific literacy. ST-SC relationship, the understanding and the attitudes are very limited and also not really explicit in the document. Creativity was mentioned, but it's throughout the grade 2 and 3 computer science domains, but not in other science domains. And also in the scientific method strands, there is only one outcome related to creativity. Technological problem solving, a lot reduced, and it's mostly replaced by coding and computational thinking outcomes. There were some attention given to inquiry skills, but not well integrated with the content outcomes. And also there are some components of the nature of science embedded, but some of the nature of science are not really consistent with the current view of the nature of science. So these are the overview of the changes and concerns that we have. And now I will pass it to Jereen to talk about the details of the curriculum content. Jereen, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Mijang. So let's take a look at some of the key aspects of the structure and organization of the 2020 draft. So one key change from the 1996 curriculum is a move from topics or units, such as building things, to an organization that consists of strands, or what the curriculum calls organizing ideas. And as you can see, these strands span across the grades. So students will start learning about matter and energy in kindergarten, and that will continue on. There are some positive aspects of this change in the way that the curriculum is organized. For example, by having these strands continue through the grades, there's opportunity for better connection and building on concepts that are learned from one grade to the next. Teachers could develop units of instruction that integrate outcomes related to matter, energy, and living systems. So teachers have the opportunity to develop their own units or topics. They don't have to stay right within the strands. And also, I would say, concepts in scientific methods should be integrated with what students are learning about Earth systems and space, etc. Another thing is that the organization has the potential for teachers to develop instructional units that are more relevant to their local context. So for example, in the current curriculum, students learn about ecosystems by studying wetlands, but not all students have wetlands in their nearby area. So in this draft, teachers could accomplish the learning outcomes around ecosystems by something that is more locally relevant to their students, whether that's boreal forests or prairie ecosystems. But these opportunities also require that teachers have the time and support to develop more integrated and locally relevant implementation of the curriculum. There are also some potential pitfalls with this organization, and those include that some may assume that they have to teach the strands as separate units. The Alberta Education website even says that one of the great changes is that scientific methods is a separate unit, but it should not be taught as a separate unit. It should be integrated throughout. Also, it's possible that if the curriculum is taught exactly as stated in the draft documents, it would in many cases come across as quite abstract and independent of content and connections to students' lives. So next slide. So before looking at some specific outcomes, Alberta Education says that the draft curriculum builds a strong base of essential knowledge. Essential knowledge is important, but if essential knowledge only consists of lists of facts, then as Henry Poincaré stated, a collection of facts is no more a science than a heap of stones is a house. So if the facts are not clearly connected to concepts, then all we have is that pile of stones. So when scientific facts are taught in relationship to concepts, it supports deeper understanding, better ability to apply knowledge to new contexts, and longer retention of information. So let's look at some specifics. First of all, there are some strengths in the new curriculum. The 2020 draft includes more attention to what we call the big ideas or unifying concepts in science, although sometimes you have to search for them, but they are embedded in there. So for example, a key idea in science is the relationship between structure and function. This concept is relevant whether you're studying plants or atoms or bridges. And we can see the idea being developed within this outcome, we can also see connections between the knowledge, the understanding, and the skills and procedures, and these should all build on each other. In some cases they do, in some cases there is some work to be done to help teachers see those connections. In next slide, Mijang. However, if we think about that, those knowledge pieces or the facts as the rocks, then there are way too many rocks in this curriculum. If we look at, so for example, look at grade 3, in the 1996, so the current curriculum we're using, there are a total of 75 learning outcomes, 29 focused on inquiry, technological problem solving, and attitudes, and 46 that are content specific. But if we look at the 2020 draft in grade 3, there are 75 learning outcomes just focused on skills and procedures, another 45 of the understanding statements, and another 96 knowledge statements, and that doesn't include the points under each knowledge statement. So if we look at the knowledge statements themselves, some of them are overly specific and potentially restrictive. So for example, functions of structures in an organism can include eating, moving, and protecting. Not sure why those functions are highlighted, and they don't connect to what students are learning in the previous outcome about roots. And they should be learning not only about the structure of roots, but the function as well. Next slide. So I'm going to point out a few things related to the content. There was lots in the content related to the environment and the ecological understanding. The environment is often framed as an object or resource to be used. You can see some examples there. Another key concern is that energy is really first introduced in grade 5 and 6, and it is only described as a resource. The concept of energy itself is never defined or developed within the curriculum. Also, the positive thing is more inclusion of content related to climate change. Recent changes better address human causes of climate change, but there are a few opportunities in the curriculum for students to consider personal actions related to the environment or the social world around them. Next slide. Computer science. My mom's a computer programmer. I think it's great if students have the opportunity to learn more about computer science and computational thinking. But in the current draft, the computer science strand is disconnected from the rest of the science curriculum. Although we say, scientific method strand should be integrated with the others, it's really unclear how the computer science strand would be integrated with students learning about living systems. There's a strong emphasis on procedural skills. And as Mijang already pointed out, in adding computer science, we've taken away problem solving in other important science related domains. Next slide. And we're to our recommendations. I am hopeful that there will be changes to the current draft. There are some good things in it, but there are errors and inaccuracies in the science content that do need to be corrected. Many of the knowledge statements, they either need to be, that should be revised or removed. And some of them just seem unnecessary, like they were just trying to fill the box so that something went in there, when what's really important is the understanding and the way students are applying that understanding. Revising the computer science strand, we already talked about, and overall enhancing outcomes related to relationships between science, technology, society, and the environment. That's where students really see how science connects to their lives. And finally, last point, the new curriculum could provide opportunities for more integration across the science areas and opportunities for making science learning more locally and personally relevant to students, but this will only happen if teachers are given time to do this, professional development resources, and curriculum resource materials that will support these kind of integrated and relevant approaches to implementing this curriculum. So thank you all, and excited to now see questions that people have.